So today, as we've discussed, is National Coming Out Day. In the last decade or so, today, our country's attitudes towards lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer folks, and there are more letters after this, but I'm going to stick with LGBTQ for the purposes of the sermon. Our attitudes in this country towards LGBTQ folks have shifted drastically. When I was in high school in a factory town in Wisconsin, gay bashing was still the norm. Now, although attitudes vary drastically depending on the region, people, especially our youth, are much more accepting of LGBTQ folks. Just last week, hundreds of high school students ran the Westboro Baptist hate group out of town. When that Westboro Baptist group showed up at their high school. The Oak Park High School in Kansas City, Missouri, had elected a transgender girl as its homecoming queen. And Westboro showed up to protest. The high school students got word in advance, and they met the van before it could even stop and the folks get out of it. Hundreds of students expressed their support for the homecoming queen and for all LGBTQ youth with signs and chants like, "Long live the queen," and "Westboro needs Jesus." The Westboro Baptist hate group jumped back in their van and drove off in less than a minute to cheers of the youth, who then said, "Now that we've sent those reactionaries home, let's get back to our celebrating." The culture has shifted, but there are still major generational differences in terms of acceptance and welcome. Like we heard this morning from the night ministry, queer youth still get kicked out of their homes more often than straight youth. The night ministry told us that 40% of homeless youth are queer, when only about 4% of youth identify as queer. Queer youth are different than their families expected them to be. They're not playing the gender role that was expected of them, and that has serious consequences for their health and well-being. Non-LGBTQ youth are nearly twice as likely to report that they are happy than LGBTQ youth. Queer youth are most worried about their families not accepting them, and then they are worried about being bullied at school or in the community. They're afraid of coming out. They're twice as likely to be harassed as non-queer youth. However, LGBTQ youth who do come out to their immediate family are more likely to report that they are happy than those who do not come out. Of course, this is a relationship, not necessarily a causal one. Correlation, not causation. Because how well the process goes depends on how important gender and sexuality roles are to the family in the first place. For some families, those expectations, the supposed to be's and the mustn'ts, are more important than the well-being of their children. My college roommate was from one of these families. When she came out to her parents, they disowned her. It was a painful and scary year for us that year in college when they refused to support her. Now, in the long run, she did reconnect with her family, and they do support her being, but they never fully accepted that part of her identity, and it's still something she's supposed to leave at the door when she comes home. We all have these roles and identities that define us. Some of our roles and identities are chosen, and some of them have been designated for us. Some of them fit and are comfortable, some of them we embrace and celebrate, and some of them distort who we really are and chafe at our souls. people challenge societal roles and identities, they challenge the power structure. Violence can come from challenging expected societal roles and identities because challenging those roles challenges the veracity of the categories in the first place. When you ask, am I really supposed to be this thing? You're also asking, is this thing really supposed to be? When you do that, people get wicked defensive. Roles and identities make people feel more comfortable and safe. They give people rules for interacting so they feel like they know how to negotiate in the world. But many of those rules include a designated power person in the interaction. So to challenge the roles and the rules for interacting challenges not only people's comfort, but it also challenges those power relationships. It challenges the power hierarchy. So queer youth face reprisals from peers who don't know how to relate to them, but also from churches who derive power from enforcing traditional gender roles, and from parents and families who had different expectations. To come out means to come out as something. Something that's different than what was expected. Something other than the so-called norm. But the something that LGBTQ folks come out as is also an identity. The something that we come out as is also a role. It's one that fits better. It's one that comforts more. It's one that enables more authentic interactions. It's possible to shed an identity that is ill-fitting and move into one that is more true to who we are. To do that is empowering. It enables integrity and celebration and deeper connection. That's one layer. So now I'm going to ask you all to do something. I'm going to warn you in advance, you are going to hate this. At the end of your roles, there are note cards and a pile of pens and pencils. So if you could all find the little pieces of paper and the pens at the end of your row, you can share with your neighbors once you find them. Find those little pieces of paper and something to write with. Okay, if you do not have a piece of paper and a pen, please raise your hand. Okay, very good. So, I'd like you to take your pen and your piece of paper and write down 4 identities that you have. 4 different identities that you own, that are yours. When you're done, look up at me. It doesn't have to be perfect, there just have to be 4 of them. All right, once you're done, I want to see your eyes. Look at me when you're done. All right. Now take a deep breath and cross one off. All right, we're going to take another deep breath together. Everybody in and out. Cross another one off. Okay, folks. Ground yourselves. Cross another one off. You have to do it. Cross one more off. I want only one identity left on that piece of paper. How did that feel?
Strange.
I see some frowny faces. There have been groans from the congregation. And that's right. Because the roles and identities that we choose, the ones that we say, this is mine, this is who I am, this one fits for me, they're a part of us. And crossing them off, even when a tyrannical dictator only asks you to do such a thing on a piece of paper, crossing those identities off does not feel good. It feels like crossing off a part of who you are. And this was just an exercise. This was something that you're doing on a piece of paper. But in real life, there are times and places when we all do this to people that we love. We actually do this to people when we ask them to leave a part of who they are at the door. We do this anytime it's inappropriate for someone to be gay. Anytime it doesn't make sense for you to be culturally different. Anytime it's not okay for somebody to be who they are fully in our presence. We do this anytime that there's a single cultural standard of normal. Whether that's white, or American, or male, or straight, or even adult. We're asking anyone who deviates from that standard to not bring a part of themselves into the space. It's called assimilation, and it hurts. It does not feel good. It doesn't feel good on a piece of paper. It really doesn't feel good in life. That's another layer. But there are other ways that we lose our identities too. Our identities and the roles we play in life change over the course of a lifetime naturally through age, or through becoming a parent, or through our marital status, or through changes in vocation. Our roles and who we are changes. The aspects of who we are increase and decrease in their importance depending on the situation and the time that we are at in our lives. When a woman has her first child, she shifts into a new role, mother. But there's often a loss in that too. Despite shifting cultural gender expectations, women are still expected to be primary caretakers of young children. And when that new identity comes in with all of the joy and pleasure it brings with it, mother, there's also loss. Identities are lost, sometimes only momentarily and sometimes permanently. When people retire, when they shift out of the working world, they lose the identity associated with their vocation and the identity and the status that comes from being a worker. They move into the identity of the retiree, and there's joy and there's celebration in that. There's also a loss. There's accomplishment and there's power that comes from being a part of the workforce. Changes in marital status shift identity too. A person who gets married is no longer a part of the single club. A person who is no longer married ceases to be part of the married club. There are different social expectations. There are different roles in society. And even when any of these decisions, any of these shifts is joyous and welcome, there's still an identity that gets lost. There's transition. Who we are and how we are perceived in the world changes. Our expectations and our interactions with other people are different. That's another layer. Your heart is made up of a number of layers. On the outside, there's a protective pericardium container that surrounds the heart. The outside layer of that container is dense and protective, and the inside layer is lubricating. It prevents friction when you move around in the world. And then the heart itself has even more layers. The outermost layer, the epicardium, is more protection as well as connection. Then there's the layer of muscle, the myocardium. That's the part that does the actual work of pumping your blood. And then the innermost layer, the endocardium, is smooth again to keep the blood moving through it and circulating. Our heart has layers and layers and layers. And all of those layers have a function. They're all necessary for our survival. They're crucial to who we are, and they do different things for us. Buddhism includes a concept of ego death, the loss of the ego, that releases one from the illusion of separation and allows one to experience oneness with all beings. When you can walk around and say that the whole world is made of stardust. This experience is available to all beings, and the work of meditation is to try and notice the emptiness between thoughts, the emptiness between breaths that opens into this oneness. About 15 years ago, I had an experience of ego death. At the time, my ego was primarily identified with being smart. I'm sure you are shocked by this news. Because of many of my identities growing up being associated or considered the norm, quote unquote, I experienced myself as different through being the smart girl, so my ego had become identified with that aspect. Studies have shown that the aspects of our identities that we are attached to move up or down our priority list based on how stressed out those identities are. So any aspect of your identity that feels different or pressured or singled out becomes more important to you in any given moment because your attention is brought to that. So while all of our identities intersect within our person and make up the whole of who we are, for instance, I am both a woman and I'm white. I am both queer and I'm middle class. I'm both a minister and a young adult. While all of those things are true at once, our attention is drawn to any aspect of our identity that's experiencing stress or pressure. So for instance, an elder in a room full of 20-somethings is more likely to identify as an elder in that particular circumstance when they're in a room full of people their own age. A person of color is more likely to identify as a person of color when they're in a room full of white people. A woman will be more identified as a woman when she's in a room full of men than what she might think of when she's at a women's retreat, where she might be more attentive to her age or her race or her ability. So that means that those of us who live with identities that are the quote-unquote norm don't notice those identities as much. So when I was younger, due to my relative privilege, I was particularly ego-identified with being smart. Then one evening, in meditation, that identity started to crumble. For some reason, I hit on something, and all of a sudden, I realized I might not be who I thought I was. And I was racked with terror. Now, this wasn't your garden variety anxiety. It wasn't just like, oh God, what if I'm not as smart as I think I am? It was ego annihilation. It was at a spiritual level. It was an existential threat to who I was. And I felt like my ego was crumbling underneath me. There was a pounding. It was destruction. Everything that I told myself I was, because it wasn't just that identity, it was the way that that identity propped my whole self up. Everything that I thought I was started falling away. And the terror was reptilian. It was pre-thinking. It was at the base of the brain. And I struggled. I really fought to hold on to my identity. I fought. And my resistance to that annihilation was the scariest and most painful part. Eventually, in this meditation, out of exhaustion, I gave in. In that moment, I let go of myself. I let go of my attachment to my identity and my ego, and I just gave in to death, to ego death, to loss. And in that moment, when I let go of everything, the doorway opened. The doorway was opening into emptiness, into the vastness of space and time, into the oneness of all being. In that total emptiness, the total lack of ego, you become one with everything that is. You come to understand the reality that underneath all the layers and layers and layers of who you are, there is a reality of whose you are. You belong irrevocably to the whole. The illusion of your separate self releases, and you can experience the absolute truth of interrelationship and oneness with all that is. Inside all of the layers of the heart, there is open space. The blood that keeps your entire body alive. The blood that brings all the cells of your body food and air, energy and breath, moves continuously through empty space in the cavities of your heart. At the center of all the working, purposeful, life-giving structure and layers is emptiness. And in that emptiness moves the source of your life. Our identities shift and change. If we're lucky, we shed the ones that don't fit and connect deeply with the ones that do. We take the time to process and grieve the ones we've lost and connect with the new ones as our lives change. We allow the ones that fit and comfort to work for us, to pump the blood that gives us life. And then, out beyond and deep within, when the ego lets go even for a moment, there is the empty space of just being. where we connect with all that is, where we let go of ourselves to gain the world. I will meet you there. Blessed be, and amen.